Hey, Craig Fahle here. You know, business news doesn't have to be boring. Check out my new show, Business Casual, on newradiomedia.com, a partnership with the Detroit Regional Chamber. We're going to explore the intersection of business, politics, and public policy, and we won't make you sleep while it's on.
Welcome to the inaugural edition of Business Casual, a partnership between the Detroit Regional Chamber and New Radio Media. I'm Craig Fahle. I'll be your host for this weekly program where we are trying to explore the intersection of business, politics, public policy, and the people. Trying to find common sense solutions to move the region forward. Every week we'll be having conversations in a casual but informative style designed to give you more information about the policy challenges facing Southeast Michigan and the state as a whole, finding ways to move the region forward to increase productivity, increase jobs, and make the region much more competitive on a global scale. This week, my first guest is, of course, Chamber President Sandy Barua, CEO and President of the Detroit Regional Chamber. Sandy, welcome to the program. It's a pleasure to have you here.
I look forward to working with you. This is going to be a lot of fun.
Well, I think we should give a little backstory as to how this whole thing got hatched. You and I were
I don't think we should go all the way.
Not all the way.
It got hatched in a bar, if I remember correctly.
That's very true, but that's, just where I had to hit you up with this idea. But the idea was, there are a lot of business shows out there that focus on the bottom line of these companies, that focus on what their stock price is doing, what the shareholder return is. But there really aren't any conversations out there that are talking about the business community's role in the greater community, what they're doing to advance the region, what they're doing to advance not necessarily a political agenda, but the right conversations on politics. I got my idea for this really when we were at the Mackinac Policy Conference last year, and one of the big topics was civility in our discourse, whether it's about politics, whether it is about business policy, whatever. And the lack of civility that we've been seeing in recent years and the polarization that exists out there. That became one of the pillars of the Chamber Conference in this last year. And my first question for you really is, what have we learned about how difficult and intractable that division is right now?
Well, the civility issue is really driving our society today, really the lack of civility. When you look at how people interact with each other, either one-on-one, certainly through social media, through other forms of electronic media. We really no longer talk with each other. We pretty much yell at each other. And essentially, everyone's talking, but very few people are listening. So we have made it a goal at the Detroit Regional Chamber through not just the Mackinac Policy Conference, but through all of our work, to really be a platform where people can come together. And we realize that, listen, there are tons of different solutions to common problems, but at the end of the day, the end result that most people are looking for is very similar. So how can we be a platform to kind of bring those ideas together, meld them together in a way that is civil, that gets people talking, and gets us to a better solution?
Well, one of the things that you came away with at this conference was, and we always call this the to-do list every year, right? There's a number of things that you come out of there learning that you want to continue working on. One of the reasons that you sort of convened this new group, really, you're looking for a bipartisan group of business leaders, politicians, everybody else to come together to talk about this sort of stuff. What was the reaction to that idea, and did you get some buy-in?
Yeah, one of the heaviest lifts on our to-do list is to create a region-wide gathering of top CEOs, top philanthropic leaders, top public sector leaders and nonprofit leaders to really see if we can continue the conversation from Mackinac here in Southeast Michigan. But we want to do it away from the cameras. We just want to kind of have a conversation just amongst principals.
Yeah, we'll bring in other cameras here on this show every week. So.
Well, cameras here, but are you talking about this show or are you talking about the to-do list?
I'm just talking about the to-do list items.
Yeah, the to-do list item.
Some of the things that come out of that will definitely be discussed.
Oh, absolutely. But so that's going to be a heavy lift. So we've started to socialize it with people. There is some interest. We're talking to a foundation or two to see if they would be willing to help fund this, because it won't be inexpensive. And then we'll be going out to certainly our public sector leaders like the county executives and the mayor to gauge their interest in participating.
One of the problems is always going to be, though, is the obviously innate self-interest of these organizations, what they would like to what they would like to promote, what policies they would like to push for. How do you get them to think outside of their own silos and start thinking about the greater good, or some sort of common themes that may not directly impact them or their business, but instead get them thinking about the greater ecosystem?
So our goal, at least going into it, we're going to let the leaders in our community kind of shape the agenda. So I don't want to be too prescriptive with the agenda, but I think what our goal is to really find areas of commonality. What are the common problems that exist? And if we can define the common problems, perhaps there are some common solutions, or some solutions that we can get 70 or 80% agreement on what those solutions are. So we're not trying to get people away from their self-interest, because these are, especially on the public sector side, they have their own constituencies. We're going to respect that. If you're a corporate leader, you have a business to run, you've got corporate interests, shareholders to be responsible to. We're not going to ask people to step out of their roles, but we think there's enough commonality that there's some handful of problems that we can solve together.
It does seem, though, that in recent years there has been more of a willingness on the part of certainly the philanthropic community to get involved in some of the policy issues around the state. And a lot of business leaders have emerged as well as being real thought leaders on how we move the region forward. And they've been willing to stake out positions that maybe a few years ago they would have been reluctant to do so. Now, how much of this is related just to the fact that Detroit was in the straits it was in, no pun intended, back at really the turn of this decade?
I think it has a lot to do with that. So, my experience being, not new to Detroit, but I've been here 8 years now, is that, prior to, say, maybe, the late 2000s, business leaders had experience trying to get involved in the city and did not meet with success. They either met with bureaucratic challenges or a lack of success, regardless of what they were trying to do. And so the businesses basically said, listen, we're still committed to Michigan, we're still committed to Detroit, but we're going to stop banging our head against the wall. I'm going to focus on running my business, and I'm going to find smaller things that I can do. Volunteer at one school, focus on one nonprofit where our people can make a difference. Now, with the strong leadership of the governor, the strong leadership of the mayor, with the bankruptcy and the turnaround, with some leading people like Dan Gilbert and Dan Lepp at Blue Cross, who kind of led the march back into Detroit, you're starting to see other business leaders like Jerry Anderson at DTE and others really kind of say, listen, now's the time for us to be civically engaged in our community.
Well, and these are the types of people that we're going to be bringing on this program on a weekly basis here on Business Casual. And this is really sort of to give you an introduction as to how we're going to approach this program. One of the changes that you made at the Chamber, frankly, and I don't want to suggest that they weren't doing this before, because that would be incorrect, but you have really emphasized this notion of sort of rational, fact-based conversation. Take the emotion out of it, let's take a step back and see where we do have some common ground and build from there. That's a different approach than a lot of chambers of commerce typically have a reputation for doing, right?
Yeah.
That was a conscious decision, I'm assuming.
Yeah, we're very research and data-based. We have a fabulous research team headed by Angela Ledetto. And, we kind of view ourselves as the keeper of the regional scorecard. So one of the events that we do every year, and actually it's coming up in the not too distant future, is called State of the Region, where we evaluate how our Detroit region, the 11 counties in southeast Michigan, how we're doing compared to ourselves over the last 5 years, and how this region is performing compared to 9 other competing regions. And that's how we kind of make some of our decisions. Our research team also works very closely with our MISHAUTO team, which is the statewide industry association for automotive and next generation mobility. And that is very data-based. And we do an annual report called the Automobility Report, and that's actually used by the governor in the state of Michigan to promote Michigan's automotive and mobility assets, and it's all research and database.
Well, and obviously that's something that we're going to be talking about in the panel discussion today, is the recently completed MISHAUTO conference that just took place here, as a matter of fact, last week in this very spot that we're sitting in right now. A lot of good information came out of there about making sure that Michigan stays on top of that industry and it doesn't get away from us in some capacity.
Exactly right. That's Glenn's mission.
Well, that's Glenn's mission. It's also one of your to-do list items here, and I just want to get your take on, and we'll get everybody else's opinion on this a little bit later on, but I want to get your take on how we've done in the last year in terms of cementing our place in that industry, making sure that we are going to be a part not just of the manufacturing and design of the automotive component, but that we are also at the forefront of the research on mobility going forward.
So the state's done very well, especially under the leadership of Governor Snyder. He has, invested in the American Center for Mobility, which is the premier kind of mobility testing facility in the world, along with M-City, which is attached to the University of Michigan, which was the first kind of world-class automotive mobility, next-generation mobility testing facility in the world, and is still a world-class facility. The governor has convened all of the key players around next-generation mobility. Glenn Stevens, my colleague, included in that, and we're at the top of our game here in Michigan. We are at the top of all the other states in the nation, and we are globally competitive. The challenge is not where we are today. The challenge, Craig, is going to be ensuring that we stay on top. And that is going to take constant, vigilant effort and action. One of the things that's on our to-do list from Mackinac is to lay out a statewide long-term policy agenda to ensure that Michigan remains number one in next-generation mobility. Because if we don't own this space, or at least overly competitive in this space, it's going to be a tough road ahead for Michigan.
Well, and I don't want to get too far ahead of the panel discussion on this question, but I do sort of want to get your thoughts on this, and as to, where we are when it comes to integrating the tech world with the automotive industry, sort of the marriage of Silicon Valley and Detroit, really, which is what we need to do, I think, if we're going to go forward successfully in this space.
It's happening before our very eyes. When you look at the intersection between technology companies and automotive-based companies, that integration is occurring at an incredibly rapid pace. And you can see it in multiple ways. First of all, you see it in the number of Silicon Valley or tech companies not located in Michigan who are now locating in Michigan. They are coming here, they're setting up shop, they want to be close to us. Secondly, you see it in the number of companies that our tier one automotive suppliers and our OEMs are buying. They're actually purchasing these kinds of technology companies. A great example is Ford's purchase of AI, an AI company called Argo, for next generation mobility. The other thing that you're starting to see, and we need to do more of, is really incubating our own entrepreneurial ecosystem here in Michigan. Making sure that people know that this is a great place to start a entrepreneurial mobility-based company.
That's a perception issue for a lot of people. I mean, we may not be top of mind for a lot of folks that are thinking along those lines. Toronto comes to mind, San Francisco, obviously, and other places that are emerging as tech centers. Austin, Texas is emerging as a place that is attracting a lot of talent. A lot of this reputation, a lot of that is cool factor. You say we're at the top of our game when it comes to automotive companies. We've always had the engineering talent. What do we need to do to attract people outside of those industries? Because that has been the challenge, as Amazon aptly told us.
So there's no silver bullet for that. We need to do multiple things. One, a lot of it's around placemaking. How are our cities and our communities welcoming places, enjoyable places, attractive places, walkable places, attractive to immigrants? I mean, how do we do that? That's number one. Number two is, what's the culture in our companies? I mean, you see the culture in our companies changing, which is a good thing, but, we have a lot of traditional companies here, very old companies, very historic companies. They need to be attractive to millennials. They work differently, they think differently, they have a different set of values. That needs to be integrated. We need to have a healthy workforce and a healthy lifestyle here. It's when you look at some of the health ratings in Southeast Michigan, frankly, they're not so good. And when you're trying to attract someone from, say, Portland, Oregon, or Denver, or Austin, they look at those health ratings and they go, am I moving to a healthy community now? We need to do that.
But this is a town that's still fighting over bike lanes. I mean, things that are offering people some mobility options, some ways to live perhaps a healthier lifestyle. We can't agree on whether or not these are good or bad for us. We still fight these little teeny battles all the time in this community.
But battles like that aren't rare. Listen, I grew up on the West Coast. When bike lanes were put in there, it was controversial.
But that was also like 1978. To be honest,
quite that old, but
well,
sure.
But what I'm saying is those battles were fought a long time ago. They've moved beyond.
That's true. But when light rail came to my home community, it was similar discussions as you hear now. When regional transit came, it was similar discussions you hear now. So, these things are kind of part and parcel of having a region with people with different opinions. When you look at history, when you look at how regions evolve, they eventually move to these things. They move to bike lanes, they move to lane diets, they move to regional transit, they move to kind of some sort of rail system. These things, just happen. Is it happening a little bit later here? Yeah, but every confidence that we're going to make it. We're going to get there.
Well, we've only got a couple of minutes left in this segment here before we get to the panel discussion. I do want to ask you this. We're starting to see a generational shift in leadership in this community. A lot of the players who've been entrenched for a long time are going to be stepping aside. A lot of the regional battles that we've been fighting may sort of change a little bit. How do we prepare for that coming shift and make sure that, I'm not suggesting that the right people are in office, that's not what I mean to say, but that we are engaging people in a way that makes them think about a larger community as opposed to the small one that they might represent?
So I think that's already happened.
Okay.
I really do. One, it starts at the top. When you look at how the governor has behaved, Rick Snyder, he's really been about regionalism. He's been about one Michigan. He's been very strong on that. You look at the local level. When you look at this new crop of leaders that we have, Mike Duggan, would Detroit be where we are without Mike Duggan? Would the region be where we are without Mike Duggan? Absolutely not. He's been a transformative leader, and he's still got a lot of gas in the tank, right? He's only in his second term. He's going to do really well. Look at Warren Evans. Warren Evans has quietly and competently turned around the financial fortunes of Wayne County in a way that no one's really expected, and he's done it without fanfare, but it's been absolutely fabulous. Look at Mark Hackle in Macomb County, right? Not only is he a new leader, relatively new leader in Macomb County, he has a new form of government. Macomb County has restructured itself. I know a lot of people like to make fun of Brooks Patterson, but I consider Brooks Patterson a friend. And Brooks has run a great county with a great business environment, great, obviously residential areas. People like to live out there. And, you get Brooks at a quiet moment, he knows how to work with the region. Sometimes his rhetoric kind of gets me the wrong way, but, we can work.
Well, Sandy Brew, we appreciate you being with us. You're going to stick around for the panel discussion.
If I'm allowed.
Here. You are indeed allowed. Again, this is Business Casual, a partnership between New Radio Media and the Detroit Regional Chamber. We're going to take a short break. About 2 minutes or so, we'll come back with a panel discussion. Tammy Karnreich from the Chamber is going to be joining us, as is Glenn Stevens of Mish Auto and the Chamber. A bigger discussion on some of these issues, and we'll broaden it a little bit more as well. So stay with us. We'll be right back on Business Casual. Welcome back to Business Casual. I'm Craig Fahle. Thanks very much for being with us today. Got a lot on the discussion here. Time for the panel discussion now. Of course, Sandy Barua, who is the CEO of the Detroit Regional Chamber, is with me, but we have added to the panel Tammy Carnreich, who is the Chief Operating Officer here at the Detroit Regional Chamber, and of course Glenn Stevens, who is the head of Mish Auto, but also the Vice President for Automotive and Mobility Initiatives here at the Detroit Regional Chamber.
It's a mouthful.
It is a mouthful, but I appreciate you being here as well. Thank you very much. So the panel discussion is basically going to be designed to sort of go over some of the issues that we're seeing in any given week when it comes to the business world, some of the challenges we're dealing with, and a broader discussion on all the different issues that we're working on in any given week in terms of moving the region forward. But I thought for this first show, I'd really start talking about sort of this intersection of the business world and the political world and what the proper role is for an organization like a Chamber of Commerce when it comes to trying to educate the public on various issues. Tammy, I'm going to put you on the spot on this one because I think it is a balancing act. You can push so far, but you can't push too far, or else it seems as if the public might be turned off to the fact that you are influencing things or putting a thumb on the scale.
I think how we balance that is really driven by those investors and members of our organization who are creating jobs and investment and give us the feedback that's needed to make sure that we continue to grow this economy. That tells us the level of how far we should push or not push. But then it's also issues that are very, very important to our regional growth that we know will also then have an impact on that future economy. We have to make tough decisions sometimes.
Well, tough decisions is one thing, Glenn. I mean, at the same time, you also have to be cognizant of where the public is on various issues and what may be something that is a policy that moves a company forward, maybe perceived by the people who work for said company as something that might set them back in some capacity. So how do you sort of figure out whether or not you are ready to get behind an organization that's pushing for a serious policy change?
Well, I think to pick up on Tammy's point, listening to the voice of the people who are your constituents or your investors is key. But I think one of the strengths that we have, and there are others, is strategic convening, is bringing people together. They might not even be affiliated with us directly, but we'll have them in the room. We'll let them use our facilities to talk about critical issues. And we find, and we've done this several times recently, when you get people in a room to talk about a common issue and it's facilitated properly, some good things can happen out of that. And that's an asset that we have and something we're willing to share is that strategic convening.
Sandy, though, like I said, that balancing act is one of those things you have to be careful. Sort of wading into the waters of policy and politics is something that every business is leery of doing. We've had a couple of recent examples that we're not necessarily going to discuss in depth today, but Ford Motor Company just yesterday and J.P. Morgan Chase both suggested they're not going to that meeting in Riyadh as a result of course, what we're dealing with Jamal Khashoggi at this point in time. Talk about the difficult decision that businesses have to face when getting into that sort of shark-infested water, because once the media gets involved, things change entirely.
Well, that's one of the values of a business association like the Detroit Regional Chamber. Sometimes companies who are members of ours say, listen, this is an issue we care about, but why don't you guys handle that? And as Tammy said, I mean, we listen very carefully to what our members want. We're always talking to them. Our board is very engaged with us. And, when companies say, listen, this is important, but we don't necessarily, as ABC Corporation, want to be the tip of the spear, that's when organizations like us can come in and say, listen, we represent, thousands of businesses in the Southeast Michigan area, and we believe in X. And, we can be very effective that way because we have not only our bully pulpit, as Glenn referred to, but we have a full-time office in Lansing that's fully staffed. We have a firm in Washington, D.C. On retainer for federal issues, and obviously we're right across the street from City Hall, so when we need to run over there and make a point, we're able to do that.
Making a point is one thing, but again, treading into dangerous waters. Is this the kind of thing that you would advise companies, for instance? Do they ever seek out your advice on how they should handle something? Because their customers may be in a different place than their leadership is when it comes to social issues, when it comes to political issues. So navigating that space, Tammy, is always difficult. And it seems more and more that it's the corporate world that is driving public acceptance of a lot of things that the politicians have been lagging behind on.
Our experience, I believe, at the Detroit Regional Chamber is companies here are very open to talking with us, to hear both sides, wanting to know what's being heard in Lansing, wanting to know what's being heard in DC in order for them to make good decisions. But they're also, very honest with us about how it might impact their company, get our feedback. Sandy mentioned our office in Lansing. We have a tremendous lobbying team and advocacy team, and you don't know the amount of times they're behind closed doors having some very, very valuable discussions that can make a difference on an issue and what impacts business going forward.
Let's just talk about the political endorsement process for just a second, because this is something that obviously our friends in Grand Rapids were dealing with not that long ago when, of course, they made an endorsement in the governor's race. Some of the member companies didn't like it. You had a situation where an employee at one high-profile company sent out a social media post. The company came back and had to backtrack that whole statement. What advice do you have for companies about getting involved in those types of decisions? And frankly, how do you make a decision as a chamber leader and leadership team about what to do when it comes to political races if you know that it may be potentially polarizing? Who wants to answer that one?
Tammy,
everybody has got thoughts on that.
Well,
sure.
we are very, very fortunate that we have a political action committee under the umbrella of the chamber, and these are very wise individuals who help us with those decisions. They represent members of our board, they represent members of corporate, governmental affairs, community, and we have good, solid discussions about what's right. When we make those decisions, it is based on a business agenda. I have to be very honest on that. But what's really good is based on the bylaws of our organization. It requires a 2/3 vote to make a decision and to move forward. So we are very careful, very cautious in looking at all sides. We bring candidates in to interview them to make sure we're really getting good information before we make a decision. We do look at our companies and what their perspective is on the candidates and how they're acting. And in the end, it is the Political Action Committee that makes the decision.
Excuse me. In these days, though, given the political polarization that we have, and the fact that different companies have different views on all sorts of things, 2/3 vote obviously is a responsible way to go about this. If you don't come upon that 2/3 vote, just don't endorse, leave it alone. I mean, because I noticed that, of course, the chamber this year, the Detroit Regional Chamber endorsed a candidate from each party in the primary. It seems that given where people are right now, that may be the safe space. You agree or no?
Well, our PAC is meeting this week. Is it? Yeah, so they're meeting soon. I'm not on the PAC anymore, actually, for because of an outside position I hold. But that will be on the agenda. And if they get to 2/3 with any one of the candidates, great. And if not, that's fine too. At the end of the day, we are a membership organization. We keep the lights on thanks to businesses that turn to us and say, we value what you're doing. Here's some of our corporate profits that go to the chamber so you guys can operate. And we're very respectful of that. Occasionally we kind of push. I'll give you an example, and this falls in the Glens area. We're really the first organization in the state that really made next generation mobility, that intersection you talked about, Craig, of automotive and technology to be a key pillar of our organization. Now everyone's talking about it, but before Glenn really made this an issue, the state wasn't really talking about it, the corporate community wasn't talking about it, and we said, listen, this is going to be important, we're going to lead on this. The other thing that I will say is that we are the only business group in the state that has a reputation for bipartisanship. We, just about every election cycle, endorse about an equal number of Democrats as we do Republicans, because at the end of the day, we feel, especially in today's environment, the business community no longer has a political party. It used to be the Republican Party, or at least the old Republican Party that I grew up in. That doesn't exist anymore. So there are some issues that we actually are more aligned with Democrats, and there's some issues that we're more aligned with Republicans.
Yeah, and to pick up on Sandy's point, I like a lot of things about how we do things and the people here, but one of the things that I really, really do like is that we don't always seek the safe place. I mean, this bipartisan selection.
That's the unusual space right now.
It is, but we are trying to say what's best for the city, the region, and the state moving forward. And we listen to our constituents, and that's why the way it's run and the 2/3 is really important. But if that's the way they want us to go, that's the way we're going to go, because we have to look at what's best for the state moving forward.
I also want to suggest that there is a difference in the way this place operates compared to some other organizations like yours, in terms of the top-down nature that exists in a lot of places, and some of the. It seems that this one is a little bit more democratic in itself in terms of the way that you approach a lot of issues than some other places that, frankly, you know, I'm not going to name any names, but they seem to be more fiefdoms than they are necessarily democratically run institutions that are advocating for all their members, not just some of their members. And how conscientious are you of the need to do that, Tammy?
So, you know, anyone who knows me knows that I have a favorite saying, which is, if you've seen one chamber, you've seen one chamber. We're not alike at all. And I do think that is the beauty of this organization. We believe in collaboration, and as Glenn mentioned earlier, strategically convening. You know, you're going to be successful if you have those who believe in what you're doing and help to build it. You can't come up with an idea, go out and lead it, and then expect everyone to follow. So we work very hard to make sure that whatever strategy, whatever activities, whatever programs, we have the following and the support of those members and investors most affected there.
Obviously, one of the things that your membership is going to be looking for in the coming years is some guidance through what is a very sort of tumultuous time in the business world. If you would have told me 5 years ago that Sears and Kmart were going to be bankrupt and gone, basically, you know, well, Sears anyway, just declared over the past weekend, that the retail landscape would be changing the way that it is, that the book industry, that the record industry, anything else you can think of has been completely disrupted. Obviously, Glenn, your charge is to make sure that doesn't happen necessarily to the auto industry in the same way, that we're prepared for it, that we're ready to go. You had a conference just last week taking a look at the Mich Auto Conference that took place, taking a look at making sure that Michigan and the Southeast Michigan area stay on top of this industry. Give me a sense as to the progress that's being made and the thought process that's working right now.
Well, there's a lot of progress that's been made over the past few years. To Sandy's point earlier, we did go to BLM, Business Leaders for Michigan, and MDOT and the state and say, let's get together. And we actually launched that in 2015
Sure.
at Mackinac. Let's work together around mobility to make sure that we position ourselves for the future. Leverage the industry we have. It's our greatest asset. And for decades we said we need to diversify away from it. We would argue that the greatest platform for diversification the state has is off of the automotive industry. As you look at artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, mobility as a service, all of those things are intersecting because the tech and the auto industries are transforming. So we wanted to have that conversation at our conference, but specifically wanted the conversation to be about the talent and for the talent. So we had 180, almost 180 students from around the state to interact with the industry, because economic growth, industry growth cannot occur unless the talent pipeline's full. And that's something we're all very committed to here.
Yeah, it's an interesting point you make there, and it seems kind of analogous to, say, the space program. We think about all the different technological advances that came out of the space program that led to other things. Do you see the automotive industry being that incubator that creates sort of those avenues for tech, whether it's in the industry or without?
Well, absolutely, and I'll turn it over to Tammy, because we also have the defense.
I'm going to let her talk.
We also have the defense industry.
Yeah.
So when you look at the auto industry, the tech industry, and the defense industry all intersecting here in Southeast Michigan, what a great place for synergy and technology development to occur.
Right. We really are in a very, very strategic destination here right now. Of course, we have the history of innovation and technology in our automotive industry. We have tremendous defense assets in this state, and you start to bring them together and you see the opportunities that can come. You know, the military has to focus right now on making sure we can compete and lethally be effective in future wars. In order to do that, they have to modernize. And I can at least speak for the Army's activities, where Secretary Esper has called, you know, for a modernization of the Army, and looking at innovation, technology, what business can bring to help the Army modernize its processes, its equipment. You know, one of the best examples to share of what we have here in our region is if you look at the automotive industry working with the Army at Tardec. Mm-hmm. And they have been working together for a long time. Secretary Esper made a visit here several months ago, and he was given a demonstration of an autonomous vehicle. And so at this point in time, you know, it's difficult to send autonomous vehicles, you know, out into battle because, you know, let's face it, autonomous vehicles have been for going straight up and down a highway, right? When you start talking about going into the military and in the field, they've got to go over hills and around trees. It's not that easy. So what's been being experimented with at TARDAC is called leader-follower. And so what they can do, talking about cargo vehicles primarily, delivering cargo and supplies, they can send a lead cargo truck out that's autonomous and then have following trucks behind it with manned vehicles. And that protects them because if something's going to happen, it's going to be that first vehicle. And so the Secretary was able to get a demonstration of that. And they're continuing to improve the focus on autonomous vehicles in the military. It's going to take a few years, but that's the future. You know, the next generation combat vehicle is going to be very, very different.
And that is a blending of really two different industries. I mean, obviously there's always been some crossover between military production, automotive production. I mean, there's a lot of the same technology that goes into it. But is this the kind of a situation where a lot of that production used to be done in, say, Southern California? You had a lot of military-based companies that were doing that kind of tech there. Is that the kind of thing where we could maybe poach some of those businesses? I don't like to use the word poach, but where we could get some of that stuff to locate here, and what do we need to do to make sure that our business attraction units are working as effectively as they can?
And that's happening.
Making that case.
It's happening every day. There's a lot of good effort around business attraction right now, considering the amount of technology and innovation that's going to be going into the defense area. When you consider the amount of procurement that takes place out at TACOM and the billions of dollars of contracts that are let out, companies want to be here. And so our business attraction team, the Macomb County Business Attraction team, they're traveling the world looking to bring companies here.
So the businesses want to be here. What about the workers? What about the people? That was one of the things that Amazon told us, Sandy, was that we were not ready. We didn't have the talent pipeline in place, and boy, this is a subject for a whole half-an-hour discussion, which we'll get to someday. But where are we when it comes to convincing the young graduates that are coming out there with the skills we need, that they need to be here?
Well, I kind of disagreed a little bit with Amazon's assessment about our talent pipeline, but you know, that's Amazon's decision to make, not mine.
So it's a perception issue that we have to overcome.
Yeah. So here is what we would say. So first of all, from an engineering talent perspective, Michigan is #1 in the nation and perhaps #1 in the world for the concentration of engineering talent. So there's no other place that is producing more engineers or that has more engineers resident than Southeast Michigan and the state of Michigan. So we're very strong on that. We're #6 in the country for PhDs in Southeast Michigan. So we're very strong on that. There are some numbers that we're not so strong on. Obviously, our K-12 system across the state is struggling. That's just not here in the city of Detroit, but that's across the state. We're really at a crisis point in serving K-12. We also need more adults with a 4-year degree, 2-year associate's degree, or a highly skilled certificate. Right now, we're at about 41, 42%. Best-in-class regions are well into the 50% region. And so we need more people with either a 2-year, 4-year, or skill certificate.
We've just barely scratched the surface on so many of these issues, but these will all be subjects of upcoming editions of Business Casual here, again, a partnership between the Detroit Regional Chamber and New Radio Media. Thank you, Sandy Brew. I appreciate you being here. Tammy Carnreich, thank you very much. And of course, Glenn Stevens, continued success in keeping our #1 industry successful here in the region. But again, we're going to be doing this every single week, and looking forward to your participation. And if you've got ideas for the show, just let me know, and we will keep this going. We appreciate it very much. Thanks for being here today.
very much for being with me today. And Shazam, we have moved to a new location. We're in the Buell Bar here in Detroit, and that's something we're going to be doing on this show, going to different places to record it and be there. And if your business would like to host us sometime, just let us know. It'd be a great way for maybe you to get a little publicity for what you're doing. Tell us what you're about, but we'd love to go to remote locations and see some new things. But we can't do that yet today because tomorrow's election day. We've got some politics that we've got to talk about right now. My guest is Brad Williams, who of course is the Vice President for Government Relations at the Detroit Regional Chamber. Brad, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thanks. I'm happy to be a part of the inaugural show. This is exciting.
It is kind of exciting. I'm looking forward to this, but I'll tell you what, there's got to be a lot of, I don't want to say nervousness on your part here, but there's about to be a major transition, regardless of who wins, whether the Republicans keep the houses or the governorship or whatever, or the Democrats. You have to prepare for a completely new administration, all new committee chairs.
Yep.
Talk a little bit about how you even think about preparing for that.
You're right, and I think nervousness is an appropriate word. I mean, I'm going to spend Election Day pacing and calling my friends, hey, what are you hearing? So it is nervousness. I mean, we are on the precipice of a really big change in this state. And so you got to kind of prepare for all contingencies. We've been going through this process with our political action committee since April and May, starting to collect surveys from candidates, to do interviews with candidates. Of course, we had a debate at the Mackinac Policy Conference. So I think we've done our homework, and we've made selections of which candidates we wanted to support financially, and that certainly helps. Come January when we have a new legislature and a new governor. But really, I think we'll know pretty quickly what the makeup of the legislature is going to be generally, kind of based on what numbers we're seeing out of the top of the ticket. But I think Election Day is always a nerve-wracking day when you're in my business.
Well, and obviously you've had a chance to meet the candidates, talk to them. This is something that you guys have to do, especially when you're getting ready to have a debate, and your PAC, of course, makes recommendations on who to vote for. And so you have an idea of where these people are going to come down on the policy matters that you care about.
Yeah.
But there's always got to be some sort of trepidation as to, all right, well, they said this on the campaign trail.
Yes.
Is this going to actually function correctly in real life? How do you deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, so, like I said, we do questionnaires for candidates for the legislature and candidates for governor. So I have a printed record of what they told the chamber they were going to support.
That sometimes comes back to bite them a little bit.
Well, thus far, I haven't had to print it out and put it in anyone's face. But you do have a little bit of idea. But you do have to calculate, how much can you trust what's coming out of their mouth when they're trying to win your vote or win your endorsement. I would say 95% of the time, what they're saying is true, but there's always gray area, right? We're asking them what their thoughts are on transportation spending. They're like, of course I want to fix the roads. Well, everyone wants to fix the roads, but when it comes down to what does that mean? Are you willing to take tough votes to make that happen? That's where the gray area gets in. And so, it's partly doing the math and saying, okay, they agree with us here, here, and here, but it's also partly art in figuring out, who's got the integrity and the guts and the know-how to get it done.
Well, I mean, you're an organization, though, that comes out with policy, preferences, things that you'd like to see happen, things that you're advocating for. How easy is it as an organization like the Chamber to pivot when maybe the politician you weren't expecting to win gets into office? They say, hey, we're going to do this without raising taxes, but then you're looking at all the potential other implications of that, or whatever. This person wants to raise taxes too much. How do you pivot to sort of get the desired result without blowing things up?
Well, and there are times where we make an endorsement in a race and the candidate we endorsed doesn't win. It varies from year to year, but usually we're right about 90% of the time. But what we always say is because we had a good relationship with your opponent doesn't preclude us from having a good relationship with you. And we're looking forward to working together. I mean, you've got to find this common ground, and of course there are always members of the legislature who maybe professionally aren't going to be on my side, or personally I just don't care for. But the thing that's important to remember is, if you're a state house member, 90,000 people picked you to represent them. So there is a redeeming quality there. There are things that those 90,000 people saw in you as a candidate that made them want to represent you, and it's important to find those things so you can start out on the right foot too.
Well, I always look at sort of the relationship between business and politicians in a little slightly different way, in that, you'll see negative ads out there saying, well, this person got this much money from this business or something like that. You know, special interest groups, they talk about that. But typically businesses and organizations like chambers of commerce will give to candidates in both parties because you need to maintain those relationships, do that sort of stuff. How do you make sure that that politician recognizes that that's not necessarily a guarantee that you're going to have their back all the time?
Well, I mean, I think, you know, you're right. I mean, when you look at our giving, it breaks down to roughly 50-50 in party. But I think, you know, one of the things that we do as an organization when we make an endorsement is we require a 2/3 vote from our political action committee to make an endorsement. So that means two things. One, we're forming consensus. It represents a broad consensus of the business community. But two, it means it doesn't take much to lose an endorsement either. And we think that makes our endorsement mean more. If it's not a slam dunk that you're going to get it, then you're going to want to work to represent the businesses in your community. Because you brought up this whole question of special interests. I mean, special interests really are just collective groups of people, right? You know, I mean, I represent, when I'm in Lansing, the job creators in Southeast Michigan that, you know, create and employ, you know, 750,000 people, you know, depending on, you know, how you calculate the numbers. So you can say we're special interests, but we're trying to advance an economy that's going to allow people to be employed too.
Do you get a sense that, you know, the role has changed a little bit? Your role has changed a little bit as you know, government relations person, right? The business community is speaking with a much more unified voice these days on a lot of different things. In fact, just yesterday, there was a letter sent to the Trump administration, well, a couple of days ago, sent to the Trump administration advising him not to do anything when it comes to LGBTQ rights. Number of large corporations signed on to that. Now, when you have that kind of wind behind your sails, talk a little bit about what it does in terms of the audience that you're going to get.
Yeah, I think it has been interesting, the business community's role in kind of these social issues. And that has been a pretty dramatic shift in the last couple of years. But I think, you know, our members understand because we've been, you know, supportive of expanding our Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act to LGBT individuals. You know, our businesses understand that a diverse and vibrant economy or a diverse and vibrant workforce is good for the economy.
But building consensus around those issues with your members, I mean, that's got to be sort of a touchy thing. I mean, for you to actually go to legislators with a unified message, how rare is that? Is that something that happens a lot?
It hasn't been as difficult as you might expect. I think I'm always pleasantly surprised when I talk to our members about what's on their mind. I mean, yeah, they're trying to run their business and make a profit and employ people, but they're also human beings too, and they want to make sure that they're doing the right thing and not just representing themselves, but their employees in the best light possible. And so, you know, on issues like Elliott Larson expansion, that has not been a challenge to date. I think most of our members understand and get why that's important.
I don't want you to have to make predictions about what's going to happen in the elections
That's
tomorrow.
good.
It's not your job to figure that out. Your job is to figure out what happens afterwards. So tell me a little bit about how you go about, you're not going to know committee assignments for a long time, things like that, but you're going to know cabinet members pretty quickly and figure that kind of stuff out. So talk a little bit about how you're going to approach this going forward, which meetings you need to set up first, which things you have to do.
Well, so we've got a little bit of an advantage this year in the legislature in that 3 of the 4 caucuses we know who the leader is going to be. You know, the Senate Democratic leader is coming back, and both the Republican leader in the House and the Senate has been determined long ago. There's no debate there. So we know 3 of those 4 people who are going to be the most vital in the legislature today. And we've been having conversations with them all throughout this election cycle and will continue. So we're pretty well set up. And, you know, the House Democrats, there's still some question, but we have relationships with all the candidates, and so we can move there. I mean, the most important thing is to really start educating the new members, particularly those who are in this region, about the wide scale of work that we do here at the Chamber, not just our policy priorities. I mean, there are times where they're surprised by the types of policies. Who knows the Chamber cares about corrections policy? Well, we do. So there's those things, but also the programmatic work we do, from our work with the Detroit Promise to Mish Auto, our business attraction work. A lot of them don't quite grasp the scale of the organization and what we can do to be helpful for them. So that's pretty important in the first few months as well.
Well, there's obviously the things that are going to be top agenda for any business organization are things like talent retention, talent attraction, education, all these sorts of programs to make sure that we have the workforce that we need, because we've got companies that are struggling to find qualified people right now. Most of the candidates understand the value in this, and are they going to make this a priority, do you think?
Yeah, I think so. And sometimes it's a matter of approach. I think the talent question is one of the more interesting ones. There's kind of three aspects. When all our business members say talent is important to them, but there's kind of three components to that. There's one, the highly skilled, highly educated talent, engineers, nurses, physicians, those types of things. Then there's the the skilled trades, those jobs that don't necessarily require a 4-year degree,
but do need training.
And then the third, there's the more low-skilled, low-income workers, and how do you get people back into the workforce? And so talent is really a catch-all for three pretty serious issues. And so it's important to make incoming legislators understand that maybe skilled trades is your passion, but that is not a silver bullet in and of itself. This is a comprehensive solution we need to look for.
You get a sense that the people that you've been talking to this cycle are ready for some of the challenges Michigan's got? You've got about a minute left.
Yeah, it's always hard, particularly in a term-limited environment. There's a lot of education that needs to take place in the first couple months and have them understand not just the complexities of the issues, but the complexities of executing on the issues they campaigned on. It's not, you don't just get to snap your fingers and have it have a bill become a law. So yes, I think they understand broadly. It's my job to make sure they understand in detail.
Well, we'll be watching. Brad Williams, we appreciate your time, sir. Pleasure to see you.
Craig.
Thanks very much. Anyway, thanks for watching the initial edition here of Business Casual. We're going to be doing this every week. Look for it on Mondays. Really enjoyed it. We're going to have a lot of fun with this going forward. Thanks.